Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Jasper and this is the PBandJ Cast, where we explore careers, ideas and unique stories. I'm thankful for you investing your time to help broaden your perspective and joining me in the journey as we appreciate the process of finding and adding value in work. Today, we are very fortunate to have Michael here, who is the head of pastoral and wellbeing education at a major tertiary hospital. And he has been notable to win a team award in 2019 for the Best of Care Wellbeing team at the Spiritual Care Australia conference. On top of that, Michael has spearhead wellbeing programs, and even from conversations I've had outside, which he doesn't know of, other people notice it as well. In an article, he has been quoted to say that he has the best job in the world. And originally, he wanted to study medicine, but changed. And so I will let him add to that.
Thanks, Jasper, and thanks for having me on your podcast today. It's a big honor. You're right. I did start out in medical school. There was some family scripts that I was following. As I got older, I realized that was not my path. That was the path my parents and brothers wanted me to do. And I didn't like the way that physicians were being trained. A lot of hierarchy, a lot of focus on performance rather than focus on relationship. I became pretty disillusioned. And in the middle of that, somebody suggested I attend a theological seminary, which is really funny. If you know me, you know I'm not particularly religious, but hey, it was an opportunity to travel from the middle part of the United States to San Francisco for 4 years. And I really grew up in that experience. From there, I discovered that you could do spiritual care and do deep level work with people in a healthcare context. So I chose an internship that allowed me to work in a hospital for a year back in 1987. And from the first day I walked in the door of that hospital, I felt like I was home. And I've never walked into a hospital since when I don't feel like I'm coming home at some level.
Wow, there you go. I think that speaks volumes, because it's very rare for one, people say that they have the best job in the world, but two, feel that they always feel at home when they're at work. Yeah. Wow. So how would you describe the role, and not going off in the order of what I've written questions, why does it feel like home to you?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, my father was a pharmacist, and I grew up behind the medicine counter with him as a young boy. My job was to pull the cotton swabs out of the bottles. But I noticed that my father always took an interest in the lives of the people that came to him. We were in a rural community, and there were times people couldn't pay for the medications, so we would often go home with a couple of live chickens in the back of the car, or a basket of apples that he accepted as payment. And I really saw him, it was important that he prescribe and deliver and give instructions properly for the medicine, but the real medicine I saw my father dispense was the relationships that he formed with his customers. He knew just about everybody in that small town I grew up in, and he was probably one of the most respected people. And he just taught me it's the first impressions. It's the relationship you form with people. It's letting people know they're important to you. And, Dad, you've been gone a long time, but I want to thank you for those lessons. And what I know when I walk into a hospital, there isn't a person inside that organization that isn't under some level of stress, whether it be the patient who's just been diagnosed with cancer or heart disease or is about to lose their leg, whether it's the nurse or the physician or the physiotherapist or any of the other disciplines taking care of that person. There's nothing normal about walking into a hospital, because it is a place of tremendous suffering and death, and a place of tremendous healing and relief. And I like to be there just at that raw edge of humanity and being involved in people's lives. Probably not for everybody, but for me, it really suits.
Wow. That's a lot to take in. Some people might want to really listen to that. Wow. I need to think about that for a bit. So the currency of relationships.
Oh, I like that. The currency of relationships. Yeah.
And I didn't mention it earlier on, but the hospital that Michael currently works at is the state's only trauma hospital. So I'm sure that he has seen and heard it all. But at the same time, I don't think that he's someone that would treat one situation with the same cloth of another. I think that you would look at each person as their own individual.
That's my hope. At my best, that's the case. There's times when it just gets to me as well as it does to any of us who are in this sort of environment, especially at a place where you see the kinds of raw humanity that we see here. Sometimes it's just say it's too much. That's when I get behind the wheel of my 4-wheel drive vehicle and I go bush for a little while.
So yeah, there's a bit of flexibility with the work then?
Fortunately, there's a lot of flexibility, and that's one of the things I appreciate. We work hard in our center, and we all the members of our team acknowledge that this work can take its toll. That's one of the things I hope to communicate to our staff people around the hospital as well, that this is not normal work. We see things and experiencing things every day that is not normal in a retail environment or a corporate environment. And self-care is actually really important.
How would you describe or define self-care?
Great question. I think it begins with having a reflective process. That means taking time every single day or throughout the day, just a few minutes even, to check in and say, how am I going? What's the impact of what I've just experienced on me? How does this connect to my own story? What are my own life experiences? How do they inform me at this point? How's just my basic level of emotions and physical tiredness? And I don't work in an environment, any of us in the healthcare system will tell you, we don't work in an environment that supports our own well-being, because generally the needs of our patients come first. But if we're not taking care of ourselves, our patients are not going to get the best of us, and they deserve better than tired, burned out people.
Very, very well put. And I'm sure many people in the hospital and many staff that you have had the care for are very much appreciative of that.
Yeah.
Who would you've alluded to it, but to put it frankly, who would you say requires pastoral and well-being education?
Everybody.
That's what I thought.
That's too easy of an answer. In the teaching that we do through our center, we talk about stress as a normal and human and even healthy response to the experiences of working with the kind of people that we work with here in this hospital, people who are facing life and death issues, who are facing, recovering from violence, all the things. Sometimes we try to pathologize stress and call in the mental health professionals and give it a name of some sort of mental health challenge. That makes stress a problem to be solved. We're human beings. We live in a stressful world. Whether we work in a hospital or not, stress is going to be part of our life. And rather than seeing it as a problem, we tend to it through human relationship, through telling our stories, through sharing our vulnerabilities, to saying when I feel scared or asking for help. So I'm not being flip when I say everyone is in need of it. There are more acute cases of stress and there's less acute cases of stress. And I just have to be fair and say, of course, mental health challenges are a very present reality in any environment. And I don't mean to, I hope I didn't sound like I was minimizing the reality of mental illness and mental challenges.
Not at all.
There are trained professionals who can help people cope with that very well. But for the most part, we're just being human beings with other human beings in stressful situations. And the relationships that are formed can often carry us through.
If someone asked why to begin with, what gives you meaning? What's your answer to meaning? When people see so much suffering, they're experiencing so much pain, how then do you conceptualize that and give a reasonable answer that allows them to say, okay, I can carry on?
You told me you were going to ask some hard questions. You're delivering. Thanks, Jasper.
No worries.
There was a wise man centuries ago by the name of St. Francis. And your listeners have probably seen statues of him with a bird in his hand and, little fuzzy critters around his feet. But he had a very wise saying that at least has been attributed to him over the ages. And he talked about one's purpose in life or one's calling or one's vocation. He said, your purpose in life is where the needs of the world intersect with your personal joy. And I like that. If If you're working in a stressful environment with people and you are deriving no joy from the work that you're doing, the person in your care is going to know that. And you might be offering technically appropriate medicine, but it's not done in a spirit of joy, service, love, compassion. Conversely, if you're just having fun at work and you're not making a difference in the world where the world needs you, that's kind of self-centered and selfish. So that's what gets me through. And, my coworkers will tell you that if I can't find some joy or, fun or love of what I'm doing, I'm probably not going to do it. I'm going to probably refer that on to somebody else. Yeah. And sometimes people say, Michael, that's really selfish. I said, yeah, but the people in my care deserve better. They need to have someone who loves what they're doing. And I try to communicate that with the staff people I work with when I'm doing one-on-one sessions or group sessions, or if I'm at the bedside with the patient. One of my questions often is, hey, what brings you joy? What fills your tank? What floats your boat? What brings light to your eyes? What brings this satisfaction? And how can you do that in a way that still keeps your attention also on other people or some social or environmental cause? People go, oh yeah, that's right. I just get really grumpy in the work that I do. I said, well then think about where the joy is. And if you can't find it, do something else.
What about for a patient perspective? When they are in the midst of, darkness and hopelessness, how then do you remind them of joy?
Well, I know when I'm in those moments, if somebody comes and tells me just to look on the bright side, I just want to slap them. So that definitely doesn't work. The work we do in the Center for Wellbeing is really a health strengths-based model. And my colleagues and I believe very, very deeply that if we listen to a person and keep our mouths shut and stay attentive, that person will share what is ultimately important to them. It may take a while, and they may go to some deep and broken places as they're reflecting on their situation. But we find if we just hold the space for that person, and it often involves long periods of silence, it can involve tears, almost always that person is going to have an awareness inside themselves that they know what they need. And they've gotten through tough times in the past. And you can just kind of see them coming up out of a pit into a new sort of sense of light and say, wow, I can do this. And they say, you're brilliant. Thanks for helping. It's like, I just sat here and didn't say a blasted word. You had all of that wisdom inside yourself. I think that's the way to do it. That's the guiding principle. Trust that people know what they need and just listen them into their own awareness.
Definitely someone, first time I met Michael, he was teaching a course, and they did a very practical example of, and completely candid, unpracticed, of that de-stressing and talking to each other and connecting. And yeah, it was actually very interesting to see how he just connected so easily with that person, even though there were a group of maybe 10 to 20 strangers, just literally watching and observing them. And it got to the point where I still remember at the end of the conversation, they breathed in sync and took a massive sigh out together. And it was almost as if through that listening, there was a deepening of a connection between them. And that helped support the other party. Yeah. So I thought I was just reminded of that. But with you though, after all these years, I'd say 20 plus years in the industry.
I'm embarrassed to say 30.
30. Don't be embarrassed. That's respectable.
Which is hard to believe because I'm only 32 years old.
Child prodigy, what can you say? What is the hardest type of patient, or what is the attitude which people can have that make it difficult for you personally to help them?
Yeah, that's an easy one, Jasper.
All right.
The person who prefers, for whatever reason, to remain miserable. rather than ask for help or take a risk and try something new. And I don't know how people get to that point in their life, but we have patients and we have far too many employees in the healthcare industry who are jaded, bitter, angry. They feel stuck. They choose to believe that nobody cares about them. And, I guess when they're ready, which means maybe they'll experience enough discomfort, enough pain in their life, they may reach out to help. But it's for those people that it's really hard to offer what you can and say, okay, Michael, I've offered everything I can, and this is a person in front of me who's not ready or willing to make a change, even though I can always see a clear path forward for another person, but that's not their agenda, that's my agenda. And all I can do is just hold them in love and compassion and manage my sense of frustration and disappointment, and hope that someday they can choose not to be in that place of anger, brokenness, hostility sometimes. Those are hard.
No, I really like what you said, especially of that pain is an indicator. I do think that pain sometimes is very, very much necessary in order to know that something is going wrong. And yeah, like you said, just still showing that compassion, still being, I guess, in a sense, a light, even though they might choose, I guess you could use the analogy of the darkness of hopelessness.
That was probably one of the most important things taught to me by my mentor back in the States. And that is, we're creatures that are a lot like water. We're going to take the easy course. We're going to go where gravity pulls us. And he said, people will remain the same until changing is easier than remaining the same. And for some people, that is an enormous amount of pain. But when it gets easier to say, okay, I'm gonna try change, that's gonna be easier than staying the same, then that's one of the favorite parts of my work, when somebody has an awakening that, hey, what I'm doing hasn't worked for me for the last 10 years. Why do I keep doing it? Well, why do you keep doing it? Well, it's all I know. Okay. It's time to try something new. And they say, oh, okay. Yeah.
No, I like the concept of water, because I actually went to visit the US last year, and I went to the Grand Canyon, I went to all these beautiful structures, and it turns out that it's not the massive earthquakes that shape it, it's water. And sometimes it could be a drop over 1,000 years, but that drop can break through an entire boulder. All right. Now, there you go. Going straight into it. Not really following the questions, but that's fine. That's fine. I like this conversation. What is the one characteristic or the one factor in determining whether you are suitable or not suitable, or how you can actually excel in the job that you do? If you can only pick one.
No, I've got one. It's to be curious. Curious about other people. Curious about the systems by which we organize ourselves. Curious about yourself. You'll never get bored, because we are such complex creatures, and we create such complex structures and communities that if you stop being curious, you're not paying attention.
What makes you curious then?
It's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm a little bit quirky. It's just the way I am. I love trying to figure out how things work. I love trying to figure out how people work. Not that I study them under a microscope and make them objects, but how they relate with each other, how they relate with me. I tell my students, if you're not surprised at least once a day, you're probably not paying attention. And then I think to myself, gosh, if I'm not surprised at least once an hour, I'm probably not paying attention.
Wow. Oh, that's very, very interesting. Geez, I could just write inspirational quotes from this conversation. then how do you do it? How do you satisfy that curiosity? Because I assume that, yes, you won't have a typical work week, but there's only so much time that you can allocate to a certain patient or a certain conversation. How then can you switch off?
Yeah. That is probably the big challenge that I've had a lot of my career. I alluded to a family situation at the beginning of our conversation where, I was supposed to be a doctor. And the reason that I was supposed to be a doctor was that my parents and my brothers experienced the death of a son and brother before I was born. And I came along less than 2 years after that death. So from my earliest memories, I learned how to read when mom was in a dark and sad place. I learned to read when my dad was checking out because his emotions were just too much. I learned to read how my brothers were and were not coping any day. It was really my purpose that was given to me by the family to take care of the grief that was still palpable. And I've paid a lot of money to a lot of professionals to figure out how to separate myself from what it is I value and cherish and what I want to do from putting other people's needs ahead of my own. And that's a lot of work. And there was a lot of my own grief in that. That is still the biggest challenge. If I'm absolutely knackered at the end of a workday and I have to walk from my office out through the hospital corridors, it's really tempting for me to stop if I see someone looking upset and say, "Hey, can I help?" And that doesn't come from me. That for me doesn't come from a genuine place of I want to help that person. That comes from a place that, I should be doing this because that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's just an ongoing process. I see that in a lot of my colleagues around the hospital as well. We do what we do as well as we do because we're capable of putting other people's needs ahead of our own. But, end of the day comes, and that's the time to say, my needs need to come first. Because if I don't do that, I'm not going to be in a very good shape tomorrow. That's one of those life lessons that you just learn over and over and over again. A couple of days ago, I threw my back out at the gym because I wasn't listening to my body. So you can't see me now, but I'm sitting in a rather stiff position in this chair, and getting up from this chair is going to be really difficult. When we stop listening to ourselves, that's when we can get into some trouble.
Oh,
that might have been an overshare, but
no. Thanks for sharing that. You just potentially saved people thousands of dollars on on counseling. So take care of yourself. Thanks. And what would you say is, kind of ticking off some of the questions, it's the biggest difference between studying the course and now actually doing the course? Not just doing the course, but also teaching the course.
Yeah.
Now I kind of gone full circle.
Yeah, the courses that I'm responsible for and the ones that I lead for employees as well as spiritual care students here at here at the hospital. I think education always has to be experiential. If educators are just giving information and students are just regurgitating it back to them, that's not really education. That's putting facts in and spitting facts out. So the courses that we do here, and Jasper, you remember this from the experience you had of the day you spent with us, getting together in small groups and sharing really significant life stories. That's an experience that you can't teach what it's like. You can only do it and then reflect on it. Or the simulated gathering we did at the end of your experience, where you actually had a go at leading a group in talking about what was real and what the impact of some particular event was. So is there a difference between education and practice? Hopefully not a huge difference, because the education should prepare you to practice. There needs to be content and theory tied up with any education, absolutely. But if we get too wed to that theory, if we get too wed to that content, especially in our work with people, that doesn't always serve us well, because you can't learn everything you can about people because every person is different. I may have strayed away from your question, but
no, I think you answered it. It's curious. It's interesting though how it's such a practical, experiential process. At the same time, you still need to, I guess, present a theoretical course to get their approval for some budget or for it to make sense to people, for it to sell it to people, not just experience this, but this is what the course entails.
Yeah.
Well, if people are still skeptical about this, I did search a bit on well-being and spiritual care, and actually some studies show that it improves patient satisfaction, and it's also that is a factor for certain governments to provide funding. So it actually proves beneficial to both parties for them to have these courses such that they can get funding. And not only that, but that spiritual care can improve health outcomes. Specifically, there was a review on mortality rates with cardiac patients. I don't know the specific article though. And also, as I alluded earlier, I talked to a medical student actually about this interview, and they did mention there was a big factor for them with all the stigma and reputation of the grind and the hardship and the lack of well-being certain doctors may face, that having a support system structure, people like you shows that the hospital is intentionally trying to address the issue, and that is a factor in determining where they would prefer to work. So it's a win-win-win, really, and that's how you can get the best of the best as well.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things we've learned, and you may have a question about this coming up, so I might be getting ahead, but one of the things that we've learned is historically the field has been called pastoral care. We're moving more toward using the language of spiritual care. Pastoral can be very limited to a particular religious tradition. And increasingly, religion is not the major factor in society that it has been even 15, 20 years ago, certainly 50 years ago. The biggest challenge that we have is when we identify ourselves as being from pastoral care or now from spiritual care. People still have a very specific idea, either strongly positive, strongly negative, but more often than not ambivalent. And I had a colleague from another department even say to me today, well, really what you're doing is just kind of a airy-fairy woo-woo thing that has no basis in fact or grounding, and people might feel better. And I cited some of those same research studies that you talked about. One of my favorite is when you have someone who's trained in offering spiritual care on a clinical ward, the use of pain medications drops dramatically, because a lot of what is talked about or engaged with is spiritual pain, some deep sense of injury to who I am as a person and to my basic sense of meaning. And that often manifests itself as physical pain. If a person has a chance to be with another person and share that sense of pain and their suffering and not have it judged and have it held gently, wow, it's probably not a surprise to a lot of people that the amount of physical pain changes, decreases. What we've done at our hospital is we have acknowledged the deep spiritual needs that come with any kind of crisis or any kind of stress. But Jasper, as you remember in your course, we were talking about the human operating system. And we all have embedded values and embedded beliefs, whether we've been formally coached in those or trained in those in a religious setting or in some sort of spiritual tradition. We just, by the fact of being a human being with all of the experiences that we have, both positive and negative, we learn how to be in the world and what gives us meaning. I call that an operating system. Certainly alludes to the modern, reality of technology in all of our lives. And operating systems need to be upgraded from time to time. We need to take stock of what of my beliefs and values are serving me well, and which have become outdated, and I need to upgrade those. I need to have a good hard look at those. That seems to be catching on around our hospital, and for especially our younger patients who may not have any exposure to any traditional belief system, they get it. And it's lovely. A patient wrote back to us one time and said, yep, it was hard work, but I've upgraded my operating system, and I think next time I'm going to have a recurrence of my illness, I'm going to be better prepared to deal with you. Thank you so much. That's satisfying. It's nice to see us. It's nice to see us going with the times and using some of the language and imagery of the times. A funny example was one of my students introduced herself to a patient as I'm from pastoral care. The fellow was a farmer from in the Southwest, and he sat up in bed. He said, okay, just tell me, what's happened to my flock of sheep? Pastoral care.
It took me a while to get that, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And we realized how out of date that word can be for good numbers of our patients and staff. And it's been fun to see the resurgence of interest in what we do under this well-being title.
Well, listeners probably definitely can't see this, but you should saw the smile that went on Michael's face when he was talking about that patient who said that they'll get better. You can see a genuine joy that comes out. And not to be too bleak, but I'm trying to phrase a question in a different light. If you could only put one thing on your gravestone, what would you put?
You didn't show me that question.
No, I didn't.
Jasper.
I'm very sneaky like that.
Huh. I don't want to sound sappy or Pollyanna or anything, but maybe something like believe in the goodness of yourself.
Interesting. If you had to choose a different profession, so the second best job in the world, what would it be?
A gardener.
Gardener. Right. What's the kindest thing someone has done for you?
I think I've been really fortunate. The thing that immediately came to mind when you said that, when I was 27 years old, my father died suddenly, and he was not an old man. He was in his early 70s. And I called my best friend and colleague, Janet, and she drove 25, 30 minutes, immediately dropped everything she was doing. And she spent that night with me and just sat. I don't think she said more than 5 words in 4 or 5, 6 hours. I don't know how long she was there. But to go through the waves of grief and the shock and my body shaking and all of the acute manifestations of sudden grief, I'd cry, and maybe I would sleep a little bit, and then I would look up, and there she was sitting on the chair next to my bed. And I never forgot that moment. And we're still good friends, even though she's still on the other side of the planet.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I would love to talk more, but we will have to bring this to an end and maybe possibly do this again sometime. But I'll end with this quote. And I'll replace the word chaplain with, what would you like me to replace it with? Well-being.
How about just human being?
Human being. Okay.
I don't know what the quote is, but let's see if it works.
Okay. Well, it doesn't really work, but let me say the role that Michael does. Okay. It goes, our most fundamental human condition is when we come face to face with our own morality. And as chaplains or spiritual care educators, we walk into some dark places and help bring in light. And that's a quote from Utah Hospital's Spiritual Wellbeing.
Oh, that's nice.
So thank you, Michael. Thanks for doing that for many people. And I hope that whoever listens to this can be inspired, encouraged, and maybe even consider the profession for themselves. Or if they need to, don't have the stigma. If you're in hospital, reach out, because there are people with great hearts, with the best intentions, just like Michael, to look after you.
I'm going to challenge you, Jasper, and say it does work to say human beings.
It does.
As human beings, we can walk into some of the dark places and help bring in light, because we all have light within us that we can share. So
I fully agree with you. Yeah.
It is a profession, but it's also something that every one of us, every one of your listeners can do when they see somebody in pain, just to walk there and say, I'm here. And that brings light to those dark places. You too, Jasper, you can do that.
Thank you. Well, I hope that I can do that for others, as others have done that for me as well. So I appreciate your time, keeping you up on a Friday afternoon when you could be going home. So thank you so much. Yeah, I just really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jasper. It's been a nice way to finish a week.
Anything else you'd like to add? Final thoughts?
Just thank you and gratitude. It confirms why I love my work so much, and it brings great joy and meaning to me and makes a difference in other people's lives. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad to remind you of that in a sense. So thanks again to the audience for being here. And if you think anyone else could listen and benefit from listening, please do share this or help the algorithms by subscribing and checking a like so it can reach others. I'm grateful you spent some time with me, and you can reach me directly at thepbandjcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your feedback, ideas, guest suggestions, or if you'd like to share your own personal journey. The email address is one word, pbandjcast@gmail.com, also in the description. Would you recommend it, Michael?
I would recommend it highly.
Throwing him under the bus till the end. Thanks, mate.